Hello there, my name's Miss Red Nebula, and welcome to another Game Dev in Progress diary. I'm going to start doing something a little bit different with these. Instead of getting to the end of a week and trying to remember everything that I did that week, I'm going to just do a very brief journal each day. So forgive me if on consecutive days that maybe the microphone's a little bit further away or something like that, or I maybe sound a little different. Otherwise, it's just a little easier way for me to be able to show what I'm working on without it ending up being hard to remember what it was that I worked on. The first thing that I added was this timer up in the corner here. It's counting up milliseconds and seconds. And the second one is when the poison pellets come to the end of their life cycle, they disappear in a little poof of particle effect. Now my plan is to replace that with a more customized particle effect if I have time to, but as it is, this'll work for the moment. Oh yeah, and I did also add a pause point where if you die, like you saw, nothing really happened to the character just yet, but if this gets all the way down to the bottom, then... Here. Oh. Well, that's interesting. Ha ha. Okay, well, hello, I just found a bug with something that I was working on last night, so... In any case, when this gets down to the bottom, the timer stops and the character will have like a little "you're dead" message or something like that. Same thing as if you jump off the side, timer stops and it gives a couple seconds before it resets. So that'll be a proper death state shortly. And another thing that I started on was my first little actual hand-drawn animation. I'm kind of working my way up to where I'll be doing the character of the rat moving around, which is a little bit more complicated, but I thought something like these little splashes would be a good place to start. I have to say, I'm really happy with how they turned out. They do look a little goopy, like they don't look exactly like water splashing, but they do look like some kind of horribly murky water, maybe with a lot of sediment or something like that splashing around. So obviously right now they're just constantly playing, but it will be a case of when stuff falls into the water is when the animation will play. Progress for today. I fixed that bug that was causing the poison pellets to not affect the character. All it was just that when they were being despawned, I had also made it so that they wouldn't affect the character, and I forgot to turn it back on after they respawned. So that was easy enough. Added the splashes down to the bottom so that they actually play when things fall into the water. Water. Also used that same splash underneath the waterfall over here, which doesn't look spectacular, or at least it looks like something's going on back there now. But I do want to, if I have time, I'll go back and change that out. I adjusted the way that these items, the food items, are spawning, so that now instead of me having to create a specific rotting version of each one, they now spawn with a chance to be rotting. So I can configure that so like the pizza has a higher chance to be rotting because it's a piece of pizza. If you leave it out for a little while, it's going to rot faster than if you leave a cookie out for a little while. See, now the character will actually slow down for a brief period of time and turns green when one of the rotting pieces of food hits them. So it still gives you back food value, but it's not always going to be that desirable to eat a piece of rotting food since it will slow you down for a little while. You won't quite be able to, like, you can still jump over one of these little pellets, but you won't necessarily be able to jump over them if a couple of them stack up, which occasionally happens. There we go. Green, I can't avoid the things. Oh, and see, it makes it much harder to avoid the things. Alright, that's it for today. I'll be back tomorrow. I drew a rat. Had to happen sooner or later. I couldn't keep using that little ducky forever. Here's the process that I went through when I was drawing our little protagonist. His name is Charlie. And then I had to kind of figure out how I wanted to animate him. See, when I was working on this little splash animation, I did it in Photoshop, which I'd done a tiny bit of animating stuff in Photoshop, making animated GIFs. But it's very clunky. Obviously, this is an older version of Photoshop. I know the newer versions have a few additional features, but what can I say? I'm still hooked on CS2 for whatever reason. But in any case, I've got where this little splash animation works just fine in here, but what it's doing every time is it's making layers visible and invisible, and it's just really clunky, really hard to work with, and definitely was not going to work for animating a more complicated character. So, I decided to go back to a program that I haven't touched since college, which has been a few years ago. That would be, well, what was formerly known as Flash and is now known as Animate. Took a little bit of relearning, but I was able to take all of the individual little pieces of my rat and assemble them inside of Animate. Even though they're raster files and Animate is a vector program, technically it can still use raster-based images. I made sure that everything was quite a bit bigger than I needed it to be in the end so that it would look good, even though it's being moved around and rotated and all of that. So here's what the animation looks like inside of Animate. And I made it kind of janky on purpose, it's not, I know about motion tweening and all of that stuff, but I really didn't want that look for this game. I wanted just 8 frames of a walking cycle for my little rat boy. And finally, I implemented the walk cycle in the game itself. And of course, right now he's just walking constantly, which is not desirable, so there's still a few more animations that I have to do. Do an idle animation for him, a jumping animation, a dying animation, and I think there was 1 or 2 others. But as you can see, even though I replaced the other sprite that was in there before, he still turns green and slows down as soon as he hits one of the rotting pieces of food and moves around just fine. So I do want to add some stuff for when he goes off the edge. As you can see, it's a little bit like he can go quite far off the edge without suffering any ill effects and can get back up onto the platform even though he's technically fallen off. So I will add some code to make it if he gets far enough off the edge, he'll go into a different pose and actually fall off. And I'm kind of liking this format. It seems like it helps me kind of push myself a little bit further to get something meaningful done each day. As this one's not a huge one, but I did get, most of the remaining animations done. Now the rat has an idle animation when just standing still, a walking animation for moving around, a Ben Hur animation, and a jump. And I am doing very poorly. Alright, well, that's actually all for today, just because animations do take a little while, so I will be back with more of this tomorrow. Well, it was about time that I started working on the level manager. In other words, that instead of the game just going the same speed the entire time, I do want it to speed up over time. And my solution for this ended up being to basically input, this is how fast I want it to be going at the beginning of the game, this is how fast I want it to be going at the end of the game, here's how many levels, here's the time between levels, and then let the program calculate everything else out. So I wanted to briefly show that inside of Unity you can do this where your script communicates to Unity what information should be here. You can see this is my game manager script. I've got some cool things here like the hunger bar saying what's the speed of it and all of that. So these are all things that, even though I've already written the code for them, I can change some of the variables on the fly here. I can change what color the health bar is. At all of its different states, I can say, well, I don't want the warning to be at 50%, I want it to be at 30% or what have you. And then this bit down here is the timer and levels section, so number of levels, time between levels, and all of that. So in-game, it'll actually go up to... Actually, let me change this down to a much lower number, like every 10 seconds, so you guys can see what's going on. So right now we start out, and you'll be able to see via the timer up here, that when we get to 10 seconds it'll speed up, and then 20 seconds it'll speed up again, and so on. Okay, so we've sped up a little bit now. Oh, good. The thing was just despawning right when I hit it. So 30 seconds, we've sped up some more. Ah! And 40 seconds, we're going pretty fast now. It's gonna get harder and harder. Ah! Well, that was something else that I did, by the way. And of course it starts back over again and you're back to the beginning speed once more. There will be a death state there where you have a picture that comes up and says, okay, well, this is what your this is what your time was, and hoping to implement like a high score system in there as well. Hopefully I can get to that, and I think I can in time. Again, this is going to be July 14th is my finish date, so it's going to be a little bit of a busy week for me on this. So the other thing that I wanted to mention was the fact that when the character dies, here, let me instigate a death. Everything despawns and the character is no longer able to move. I did have where if the character is in the air when they die, that like this, they do fall back to the ground. Right now you see that the animation doesn't change. There will be a death state animation. I just haven't made it yet. So that's one of the next things. And that's it for this one. I did want to point out that I also went ahead and created a Facebook page and a Twitter for Ms. Red Nebula finally, and I will link them down in the description below. Otherwise, feel free to like or comment, and if you want random updates from my little world of art and gaming, subscribe. If you enjoy what I do and are interested in supporting the channel, check out my Patreon. A big thank you to my current patrons. That's all for now. Bye!